Michelle, what kind of easing will we potentially see in phase two of the reopening? And I guess what is the balancing act that the government is trying to make right now?
Well, that's certainly right. Very much a balancing act at this point. Originally, the phase two reopening wasn't supposed to happen for another couple of weeks, but they do see that the caseload is stable enough and they want to get this economy moving. The government's GDP forecast for this year is for as much as 7% contraction, which would be the worst downturn since independence. Obviously not a good message you want to have during an election season, which we expect will happen very soon. But as of Friday, a number of things we'll be able to do. Retail businesses will be able to reopen their physical outlets. Food and beverage dine-in will be allowed to resume, of course, with tables of 5 or fewer people. Sports, parks, other public facilities will reopen, and social gatherings in households will also be allowed of 5 or fewer people. We're still waiting to hear more announcements further down the line of larger public venues. Obviously, nothing of the sort of concerts and that sort of thing will be allowed to resume yet. And there will be some capacity limits at malls and other large standalone retail outlets. But at the same time, there's another interesting conversation going on around contact tracing. Singapore announcing very recently that it won't use a contact tracing system that was developed by Apple and Google in a rare collaboration there. They will use their own domestic technology, and we will see those devices rolled out probably later this month. It won't be mandatory yet, but there is a debate going on as to whether or not we may need to have it mandatory. The government may make it mandatory to use these devices if there isn't a high enough take-up rate.
How does Singapore compare in terms of those restrictions and virus caseloads to other parts of the region?
Yeah, well, thankfully here, Singapore has seen a steady progression in the caseload, even with the crisis in the foreign worker dormitories that they've had to handle over the last few months. They've keeping cases outside those dorms to a minimum, typically in single digits or sometimes 0 day to day. So that compares, in quite a contrast to other parts of the region. Philippines, one recent example, recording 490 new infections on Monday in the Manila area, or mostly in the Manila area, I should say. But they're, back to that balance. They're showing the difficulty of reimposing limits once there are those second waves. Metropolitan Manila is remaining under somewhat loose restrictions, what they call a general community quarantine, while they are implementing more strict stay-at-home orders in Cebu City, where there's been a widespread community transmission. And then lastly, I would just point to India. There's a great story out of our Mumbai bureau yesterday about contact tracing and trying to get the infections down in the continent's biggest slum, where workers have knocked on 47,500 doors since April and measured temperatures and oxygen levels and screened almost 700,000 people in that cluster. That daily infection rate is down to a third of what it was in early May. Half of those infected are recovering, and the number of deaths has really plunged this month. So that's somewhat of a success story, but it is in sharp contrast with the rest of India. And, many challenges are being faced throughout the region on these levels and at different speeds. So we'll have to see how things go.